Howdy folks, it's me, Josh. The year is 1803, and for about 400 years, the Kingdom of Hungary had been under the rule of the Austrian Habsburgs. But though they were under the rule of the Austrian monarchy, Hungary was still technically independent, with the king acting as both the Archduke of Austria and the King of Hungary equally. But that was about to change. After Napoleon began running amok across Europe, the Holy Roman Emperor, Francis II, was starting to get kinda worried. As his armies continued to get kicked by Napoleon, he began to worry that Napoleon might try to claim the title of Holy Roman Emperor for himself, or, even worse, destroy the Holy Roman Empire outright. So, wanting to protect his family's prestigious imperial title, he decided to proclaim the Empire of Austria, which included all of the lands held by the Austrian Habsburgs, including Hungary. As time went on, and Francis's fear of the destruction of the Holy Roman Empire came to pass, the Hungarians, who had also been influenced a great deal by Enlightenment thought, were starting to get pissed about the fact that they didn't have a country anymore. So, fueled by the liberalism of the Enlightenment, as well as their newfound sense of nationalism, the Hungarians started to push for liberal reform in Hungary and across the entire Austrian Empire. The Austrians, though, weren't having it. After seeing the devastation that liberalism had brought upon Europe throughout the Napoleonic Wars, the Austrians were set on maintaining the traditional conservative order by any means possible, not wanting to see yet another one of their empires destroyed. So, this would ultimately lead to rising tensions between the conservative Austrians and the liberal Hungarians, which would soon come to a boiling point. In Hungary, a man named Lajos Kossuth, who headed the charge for liberal reform in the Hungarian government, began to grow in popularity for his speeches demanding reform in not just Hungary, but Austria as a whole, pushing for constitutional parliamentary governance. And in 1848, after a successful revolution in France which overthrew King Louis Philippe, Kossuth felt emboldened to take his supporters and march on Vienna. Once he and his army of liberals arrived in Vienna, the Chancellor, Clemens von Metternich, who had been orchestrating Austria's efforts at preserving conservative stability, resigned and fled the country. And the Emperor, Ferdinand, who was, mentally inept, ended up caving to Kossuth, granting his demands. But, of course, the Hungarians wouldn't stop there. After this victory, this only left liberal Hungarians even more emboldened as they now sought total independence from Austria as they proclaimed the revival of the Kingdom of Hungary, starting the Hungarian Revolution of 1848. Peculiarly, at least at this point, the revolution was against the Austrians, but not the Austrian Habsburgs, as Emperor Ferdinand remained as King of Hungary, but with his power reduced to the point that it was almost like he wasn't even there at all. So, even though their emperor was still King of Hungary, on paper, the Austrians were pissed about losing control over Hungary, and so invaded Hungary. Or that's what I would say if their entire army wasn't already busy fighting a war in Italy. So, it seemed as though the Austrians had found themselves in quite a pickle. But then, they had an idea. The Austrian Empire was famously plagued with its many different nationalities, all vying for power against each other. And so, when Hungary broke off, they ended up taking many of those minorities with them who weren't that happy about the nationalistic Hungarian government. So, the Austrians began to make deals with the different groups as they began to rise up against Hungary, fighting on Austria's behalf. But, oops, it didn't really work as the Hungarians crushed the revolts. So, once again in quite a pickle, the Austrians, who had been lacking in strong leadership since Metternich's departure, decided to coerce Emperor Ferdinand into abdicating, as he was then replaced by the 18-year-old Emperor Franz Joseph. And Franz Joseph, a staunch conservative, was not having any of Hungary's nonsense. And Hungary was also not having Franz Joseph, as after he tried to repeal some of the liberal reforms they made, Hungary would abolish the Habsburg monarchy, becoming fully independent. But Austria was still fighting 2 wars at once and still couldn't really do much. But never fear, because Russia is here. Franz Joseph decided to call up his buddy Tsar Nicholas, another staunch conservative, and asked him if he could help put down the revolt. And so, Nicholas would end up sending in the Russian army to crush the revolt, as Austria would end up regaining control over Hungary. And with that, Austria would once again return to its conservative, absolutist rule, as Austria came under the control of Franz Joseph, with Hungary along with it. But what if that changed? What if, in an alternate timeline, Hungary had won its independence from Austria? In this timeline, we're going to assume that, upon his ascension to the throne, Franz Joseph, who was known for his pragmatism, decides to just cut his losses with Hungary, who had in many ways been dragging the Austrian half down, as Austria begins to focus on matters in Italy and Germany. So, Franz Joseph ends up abdicating the throne of Hungary as a republic is proclaimed, with Kossuth serving as its president. Hungary was extremely agricultural and quite underdeveloped. So, Kossuth, who had made pushes for industrialization in our timeline, would likely end up beginning a huge program to industrialize Hungary and take advantage of the Danube and Adriatic Sea for trade. Austria, though, still wouldn't be all that thrilled about a powerful liberal Hungary causing problems in Central Europe and the Balkans. So it's very likely that Austria, once again pushing for influence in the region, would sponsor independence movements from the various ethnic minorities in Hungary. Russia, meanwhile, who was trying to promote itself as the protector of Slavic peoples in Europe, would likely do the same, attempting to spread its own influence into Hungary and the rest of the Balkans by extension. So, as revolts break out against the Hungarians, Hungary ends up seeing a similar loss of land that they saw in the Treaty of Trianon after World War I, with the Slovaks, Croats, Serbs, and Romanians breaking away from Hungarian rule. And Austria and Russia once again find themselves at odds as they compete for influence among these new states. Meanwhile, without being able to exert its influence into the Balkans anymore, and without the Hungarians keeping the Austrians from engaging more in Germany, Austria would very likely end up putting a heavy emphasis on reasserting its dominance over the German states. And once again, without Hungary, this would revive the German nationalist plan for a greater Germany, which included, and which would be ruled by Austria. So, seizing upon this opportunity, Austria would very likely begin pushing for German unification as a way to solidify its hold over Germany. Prussia, meanwhile, would have mixed feelings about this. Though many in Prussia would welcome the return of the old Holy Roman Empire in this new form, many others, mostly in the nobility, would push back against this, not wanting to submit to Austrian Habsburg rule again. But the king, Frederick Wilhelm IV, a romantic who wished to see a return to the old Holy Roman Empire, supported the idea of a Habsburg-led Germany and would overrule the nobility as Prussia once again submits to Habsburg rule as Germany is united under Austria. Meanwhile, with the entirety of Germany under Austrian control, the French would likely be much less willing to sponsor Piedmontese efforts at Italian unification, not wanting to go to war against all of Germany. So, Italy never ends up uniting, as it likely comes under Austrian domination once again. With Germany once again under Austrian control, Franz Joseph likely begins pushes for greater centralization and modernization of the empire, as Germany grows into a similar powerhouse that it had in our timeline. And France and Russia, who would have each had their own issues with Germany, for Russia wanting dominance over Hungary, and for France wanting to influence Italy and seize lands up to the Rhine, would end up forming an alliance together. And seeing itself surrounded and vulnerable, Germany would likely end up forming ties with Britain, a natural ally who had grievances against both France and Russia, and without Wilhelm II's naval buildup souring ties. So, as Europe once again divides into factions, the continent begins heading towards the Great War, with an Austrian Germany, unburdened by Hungary, at the center of it. So I hope you enjoyed today's video. If you did, make sure to stick around for more. And hey, you could also, maybe, subscribe or something. So that's it for today's video. Well, till next time, see ya.